Of course, I'm sorry for the interruption that occurred. I had a sudden power cut at home. So this is a more accurate, of course, 1 second, please. I apologize for the interruption that occurred. Again, this is a more correct chemical equation because here we have 6 carbon dioxide plus 12 water. In the past, when you were in the elementary stage or maybe in the middle school, we used to tell you 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water. What happened here is that we added 12 molecules of water to the 6 carbon dioxide molecules, but actually we obtained the same product, which is glucose plus 6 oxygen, and instead of obtaining and instead of having no water here as usual, as we used to write in the previous simpler equations, like this one, for example, what happened is that we added 6 molecules of water here because it's actually 12 molecules of water that bind with 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and the difference that we added here, which is the 6 water molecule, has been added at the other side in order for the equation to be balanced. So this is the more simplified equation of photosynthesis, and this is the more elaborated and accurate one. Now, this is the overall reaction of photosynthesis. But photosynthesis has 2 components, a light-dependent reaction and a light-independent reaction. In case of the light-dependent reactions, that should always precede the light-independent reactions. There is a kind of energy collection or energy harvesting. So what happens actually in the light-dependent reactions is that the plant cells collect light energy from the sun and convert it into chemical energy that is stored in ATP. And then the water molecules, because as you know, water is necessary for photosynthesis, will be split by the light energy. And this is what we call photosplitting. So here, when the water is split by the sun energy or the energy in light, water will be split into 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. And if we have 2 water molecules, then we will obtain 1 oxygen molecule. So actually here, in order to get O2, you should have 2 hydrogen again and another oxygen. So you should have first 1 molecule of water and another molecule of water. When they both split, we get 2 oxygen atoms that combine in order to form this oxygen molecule, and then we have 4 free hydrogen atoms. So actually, in order for this chemical equation to be correct, we should write 2 here. So we have 2 water molecules that split to give 4 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen molecule. And it is this oxygen that is released at the end of the day in photosynthesis. So this is the released oxygen. So if you're ever asked about the released oxygen, where it comes from splitting of water by light, or it comes from photolysis of water. Photolysis of water. What does this mean? Lysis means splitting or breakdown, and photolysis means lysis or breakdown under the effect of the solar energy. We have just said that the 2 water molecules give one oxygen molecule and 4 hydrogen atoms. Where have the 4 hydrogen atoms gone? They were carried by another new hydrogen carrier, very similar to the hydrogen carrier we have seen in cellular respiration, but that has a phosphate group. So instead of having NADH, we will have NADPH, and we say it nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, and this is, of course, the reduced form. And then we have the light-independent reactions, and this nomenclature is very confusing. In the past, we used to say dark reactions of photosynthesis, and scientists said that, or found out that this word or this nomenclature is very confusing because it gives us the impression that this second stage of photosynthesis should occur in the dark. So they decided to call it light-independent reactions. But again, this nomenclature is not accurate. Why? Because the term light-independent reaction gives you the impression that this second stage of photosynthesis that occurs after the energy harvesting stage and where we synthesize glucose does not depend at all on light. Although actually light-independent reactions cannot occur if they are not preceded by light-dependent reactions. So we have to make this clear that light-independent reactions cannot occur if not preceded by light reactions, if not preceded by light-dependent reactions. Why? Because as you can see, those two essential products of light-dependent reactions, ATP and NADPH, will be essential for synthesis of photosynthesis. ATP will be the source of energy that will be stored in the bond, and reduced NADP will be essential to reduce carbon dioxide. So we need ATP to give the energy that will be stored in the bonds of glucose, and we need reduced NADP to provide the hydrogen atoms that will reduce the carbon in carbon dioxide into C6H12O6. So light-independent reactions cannot occur if not preceded by light reactions. If this is true, then why have scientists called it light-independent reactions? For only one simple reason, that light-independent reactions can occur in the dark, and from there came the nomenclature dark reactions, can occur in the dark, but with a condition, provided what? Provided they are preceded by light-dependent reactions during daytime. They are preceded by light-dependent reactions in daytime. I hope this was clear. So light-dependent versus light-independent reactions. Light reactions, as we said, use solar light energy or any other type of light energy directly in order to produce ATP and to produce, reduced NADPH. So we can consider these two molecules products of light-dependent reactions. So what are the end products of light-dependent reactions? The end products of light-dependent reactions are ATP and reduced NADP. Both products, ATP and NADPH, are important for the light-dependent reactions to occur, as we have just said, because ATP is the source of energy and reduced NADP is the source of the hydrogen atoms to reduce carbon dioxide. Calvin cycle is another name for the biochemical pathways that occur in the light-independent reactions. So don't forget that just like Krebs cycle in cellular respiration is a biochemical pathway, Calvin cycle in dark reactions or light-independent reactions of photosynthesis is a biochemical pathway. And we have also seen that glycolysis is a biochemical pathway. And you can add to all these three that we have just mentioned, you can add the cellular responses in, for example, the G protein coupled receptors. If you remember, the G protein coupled receptors, when they were stimulated, they initiated a biochemical pathway that is also an example of biochemical pathway. So ATP provides the required energy, reduced NADP carries the hydrogen that will help in reduction of carbon dioxide, and light-dependent reactions occur only when light is present. And as we have said before, why only when light is present? Because they require light energy for several reasons. They require light energy for photolysis or breakdown of water, and they require light energy for activation of the electrons in the chlorophyll molecule, activation of the chlorophyll molecules. And we will see later on the importance of activation of chlorophyll and of photolysis, and how photolysis is important to correct what happens in activation of chlorophyll. But until we reach those details, you can just say that light energy is important because light energy, so this is the simplest way you can answer why light energy is important, because it is converted into chemical energy that will be stored in the bonds of glucose. On the other hand, light-independent reactions can occur in the dark, as we said, provided they are preceded by light-dependent reactions to supply the necessary ATP for energy and the necessary reduced NADP for reduction of carbon dioxide. So up till now, we have summarized the biochemical pathways of cellular respiration and photosynthesis and their relationships to each other. It is important to review a cross-section in a leaf in order to understand where exactly photosynthesis occurs in green plants. Why are we studying this section in a leaf? We are taking a section in the thickness of the leaf. This is because the leaf is the main site for photosynthesis in the green plant. Main site for photosynthesis. And it is the main site for photosynthesis because it is rich in the organelle that contains chlorophyll and the chloroplast. And the chloroplast contains the green pigment chlorophyll, and colored pigments are essential for photosynthesis. Are there other sites of the plant that can photosynthesize? Yes, like the stems, for example, of the plant, they can photosynthesize to a lesser extent, but there are sites of the plant that do not photosynthesize, like the roots, because the roots do not contain any colored pigments, they do not contain colored plastids, and they are under the surface of the soil usually, and therefore they do not receive solar energy. They do not receive solar energy. Now, in this leaf cross section, we can see that we have an upper a cuticle, and that cuticle is made of a water impermeable substance in order to minimize evaporation from the underlying tissues to keep water for the plant. And then we have the upper epidermis, because there is another lower epidermis that also has a lower cuticle. So this is an upper cuticle. Of course, that cuticle is well developed in desert plants in order to, because the weather is very dry and the diffusion gradient for water vapor is very high. So in order to prevent dehydration of the plant, this waxy cuticle, usually the cuticle is waxy, and since it is waxy, it would be water impermeable and it protects against evaporation from the underlying tissues. Does this mean that there is no evaporation at all? No, because sometimes in between epidermal cells, we have spaces, small spaces that are guarded by guard cells, and these guard cells are bean-shaped like this. And these openings are called the stoma, and they help evaporation. But the difference between transpiration or evaporation from the surface of the leaf through the stoma and the transpiration from the rest of the cuticle is that the guard cells open and close the stoma, and therefore it is controlled evaporation. Of course, the number of stoma on the upper surface of the leaf is lower than the number of stoma on the lower epidermis. So here we have more stomata, or more, yes, the plural is stomata, and we have more stomata because the risk for evaporation from the lower surface is less than the risk of evaporation from the upper surface because it is less exposed to the weather. And then underneath the upper epidermis, we have those palisade cells, and they are called, the layer is a palisade layer because the cells are columnar in shape. So they look like palisades, and the palisade layer forms part of a bigger layer, which is the mesophyll. So the mesophyll consists of two components: the palisade mesophyll, where the cells are perpendicular to the epidermis and are more or less cylindrical in shape, and the spongy mesophyll, where the cells are more or less spherical and irregular in shape, and they are arranged around an airspace. Here you have an airspace where the air that enters via the stoma accumulates. So the airspace or the air chamber lies behind the stoma, and this indicates that the stoma is not only a passageway for water vapor or water in general, but it is also a passageway for gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. And of course, we can say in general that the stoma is a passageway for gases because most of the water that passes through the stoma is in the form of a water vapor. The main difference between the mesophyll and the spongy mesophyll, the palisade and the spongy, other than the arrangement of cells, is that the chloroplasts here are very densely packed chloroplasts. So we have dense chloroplasts inside the palisade mesophyll, and they move up and down according to the intensity of the sunlight. So if we have high intensity of sunlight, they move away from the sun in order to avoid injury, and vice versa. In spongy mesophyll, the chloroplasts are fewer. Here we have also, this is the second difference. And the third difference is about the spaces between the cells. The spaces here are minimal to minimize evaporation, and the spaces here are rather wider. Traversing the spongy mesophyll, we have the vascular bundle, and it is a bundle of vessels that cross the leaf. So if you look at the leaf pedicle, you will find, or the leaf stalk, you will find that it will have a central vein and then smaller veins. And inside each of these a bit elevated veins, you will find that we have vessels. So that's why it is called vascular bundle. And these vessels are mainly xylem vessels that carry water up the plant and phloem vessels that carry the food away from the leaf where it has been synthesized. Of course, we have studied the chloroplast before, and we have mentioned that we have an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and the inner membrane is thrown into folds, and these folds are called thylakoids that pile together to form a granum, and the stroma is outside the granum. So here you can see the granum is a pile of thylakoid, and the thylakoid is the inner membrane of the chloroplast that looks like this, and that gives you the impression that the thylakoid is a box or a small disc that is full with the pigment. And then in between, we find that some of the thylakoids have extensions, and these extensions fuse together to form the lamella. And the importance of the lamella is to increase the surface area that is exposed to the sun, and therefore to increase the amount of pigment molecules that will be excited by the solar energy. So you have the inner membrane, the intermembrane space, and the outer membrane. So again, just like we said in the chloroplast, we have criteria to prove the or to emphasize the endosymbiotic theory. So we have the double membrane, and then we have their own DNA that is not clear here, and we have their own, of course, their own DNA that is small, circular, like the prokaryotic DNA. And then we have their own ribosomes that synthesize their own proteins. So their own DNA, this is the first evidence. Their own that is similar to that of prokaryotes, of course. Ribosomes, this is the second evidence. A double membrane, this is the third evidence. Where is the double membrane, and why isn't the double membrane, where is the inner membrane? This is the inner membrane. Why isn't the inner membrane folded like the inner membrane of the mitochondria? It is folded, and the folds start here. So you can see that the inner membrane is thrown into folds, but they give you the impression of those small discs that are piled one over the other and that are full of chloroplast. So the chloroplast is very well adapted to perform its function. First, because it has a folded inner membrane that increases the surface area. Second, because it has the pigments that can be excited by solar energy. Third, because it has its own DNA and its own ribosomes that allow it to control its own biochemical reactions and synthesize its own proteins without being forced to wait for the rest of the cell. And it has its own enzymes on the inner chloroplast membrane that will carry out the light-independent reactions. And in the stroma, it has its enzyme, on the inner membrane, it has the enzymes that stimulate the light-dependent reactions, whereas in the stroma, we have the enzymes of Calvin cycle. So again, we have folds to increase the surface area. This is number one. We have pigments to photosynthesize. We have its own DNA and its own ribosomes to synthesize its own proteins. This is number three, and control its own reactions. We have two groups of enzymes. Enzymes that are present on the inner thylakoid membrane for light-independent reactions. for light-dependent reactions, and in the stroma for light-independent reactions. So the chloroplast is an organelle that is enclosed by a double membrane. The chloroplast has an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and the space between them is called the intermembrane space. Inside the chloroplast, we have piles of thylakoids, and these piles of thylakoids are called the grana. And then we have outside the chloroplast, we have outside the stacks of thylakoids, we have the stroma. The thylakoid membrane, as we said before, carries a series of enzymes and electron carriers that are categorized into or classified into photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. A photosystem is nothing but a group of photosynthetic pigments capable of absorbing light energy. So we call them photosynthetic because they are capable of absorbing light energy, and a group of enzymes that catalyze certain chemical reactions and do other functions besides activation of the chemical reaction. So the thylakoids, with their membranes that carry the pigments and enzymes, are thought to be the platform for the light-dependent reactions. So the light-dependent reactions occur on the thylakoid membrane that surrounds the grana, and therefore the light-dependent reactions occur in the grana, whereas the light-independent reactions or the biochemical pathway of Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. We will stop here, and then we will be continuing photosynthesis in the next video.